Alexander Carter, a successful businessman, never imagined that a romantic dinner at a restaurant would mark the collapse of his perfect world. There, working as a waitress and showing a clear sign of pregnancy, was Camilla, his ex-wife. However, what she was hiding went far beyond what Alexander could have imagined. This was no mere coincidence, but the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. Alexander, wearing his impeccably tailored suit, was sitting at a table in one of the most sophisticated restaurants in the city. The place was known for its elegant and discreet atmosphere, perfect for special occasions. He smiled, although his eyes were slightly tired, while Haley, his girlfriend, talked excitedly about her upcoming trip to Paris. "I can't wait to walk down the Champs-Élysées and have dinner by the Seine," Haley said, her eyes shining with anticipation of the trip. Alexander, always the focused businessman, was more relaxed that night, enjoying the success of the $1 million contract he had closed hours before. However, his relaxation was short-lived. As he looked around, something, or rather someone, caught his attention. His smile faded, and the wine glass almost slipped from his hands. There she was, Camilla, his ex-wife, walking between the tables with a tray balanced skillfully in her hands. But it wasn't just her presence that shook him. Camilla was visibly pregnant. Alexander felt a whirlwind of emotions, a mix of shock and guilt that he couldn't quite define. The last time they had seen each other, he had been so wrapped up in his ambitions and in building his business empire that he had decided there was no more room for their marriage. She wanted more from him, more time, more attention, and he thought he was doing the right thing by prioritizing his career. Time passed, and Alexander never bothered to check in on Camilla. Now, seeing her working as a waitress, carrying not only the tray but also the visible weight of her pregnancy, made his heart sink. Haley, oblivious to Alexander's inner turmoil, continued talking about the reservations she had already made for the 5-star hotel. "It will be a real dream, Alexander. We need to do this more often, travel together, and forget about the world." Alexander just nodded, but his gaze couldn't leave Camilla. He barely heard Haley's words. Camilla's every move seemed to pull him into a reality he had ignored for too long. She paused for a moment, feeling his gaze, and when their eyes met, the world around them seemed to stop. Haley continued to describe in detail the plans for the trip to Paris, her voice full of excitement and anticipation. "We can visit the Eiffel Tower at night when the lights are shining. It's magical, Alexander. And there's an amazing restaurant at the top where we can have dinner with a breathtaking view." Alexander, however, couldn't focus on Haley's words. His mind was elsewhere, lost in a past he was trying to forget. Camilla's recognition hit him like an unexpected blow. He vividly remembered the moment he decided to leave Camilla. At the time, he believed that following his relentless ambition was the right path, a necessary step to achieving success. He justified himself by saying that Camilla deserved more than he could offer at that moment, that it was better this way. But looking at her now, carrying a new life inside her, Alexander felt the crushing weight of his choices. The smile Haley wore couldn't undo the lump forming in his throat. He looked at Camilla again, trying to understand how she could be there, working, visibly pregnant, without him knowing anything. Memories came flooding back, the days when they were happy, before he became consumed by work, and the last bitter argument that ended it all. Haley, noticing that Alexander was quieter than usual, touched his hand gently. "Are you okay, honey? You seem distant." Alexander blinked, forcing a smile to mask his inner turmoil. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking about everything we need to plan for the trip." Haley smiled, seemingly convinced, and went back to talking about the places she wanted to visit. But Alexander couldn't escape the storm of emotions that was taking over him. Each of her words seemed lost in the air as he struggled with the image of Camilla, pregnant and working as a waitress. He wondered how she had gotten into this situation, and more importantly, why he wasn't there to help her. The weight of his choices paralyzed him, and he knew that in that moment, something inside him had changed forever. Alexander felt his heart race as his eyes met Camilla's. The surprise in her eyes was as evident as the pain they both shared in that silent, tense moment. Camilla, holding a tray with trembling hands, froze for a moment, unable to look away. Alexander tried to process the mountain of emotions that suddenly emerged. He could see in Camilla's eyes a mix of hurt and resilience, a strength he didn't fully recognize, but that made him feel small in front of her. Haley, noticing Alexander's distraction, tilted her head and frowned. "Alexander, is everything okay? You look lost." He quickly looked away from Camilla, forcing a hasty smile. Yes, everything is fine. I thought I recognized someone." Haley looked around curiously, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Oh, it must be just an impression. Paris is waiting for us, honey. Focus on that." Alexander nodded, trying to maintain his composure. But something inside him was driving him to talk to Camilla. He knew he needed to clarify what was happening, understand why she was there, and how things got to this point. "Haley, give me a minute. I'm going to the bathroom, and I'll be right back." He stood up quickly before she could answer, heading to the back of the restaurant, where Camilla had disappeared moments before. As he walked, Alexander took a deep breath, trying to prepare himself for what was to come. He knew this conversation wouldn't be easy, but something inside him told him it was necessary. When he spotted Camilla near the kitchen, he approached with cautious steps. "Camilla," he called softly, his voice thick with restrained emotion. Camilla turned, surprised and at the same time reluctant. "Alexander, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he said, his eyes pleading. "Please, just give me a minute." Camilla hesitated, her gaze oscillating between anger and sadness. Finally she nodded, knowing that somehow this inevitable moment had to happen. Alexander took a step forward, anxiety tightening his chest. The silence between them was thick, almost unbearable. Camilla seemed to struggle against the words that were about to be spoken, and he knew she was trying to avoid confrontation. But he couldn't run away from this anymore, not after what he'd seen. "Camilla, please," he began, his voice softer than he'd imagined. I need to know. Why didn't you come to me? I don't understand. What happened to you? And the baby, Camilla." The mention of the baby made Camilla's face harden. She looked at him, her gaze distant, as if trying to hide the pain. She was no longer the woman he knew. She had changed somehow, for the better perhaps, but now there was a hardness about her, an invisible barrier between them. "Alexander," she replied in a firm but restrained voice, "this is none of your business. You made your choice. Remember that. And if you're here just because of the baby, it's too late." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. Camilla's words hit him like a cold blow. He knew he had been selfish, that his ambition had caused him to distance himself from her irreparably, but hearing that from her was like a brutal awakening to reality. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice shaking with regret. I was an idiot. I just wanted to understand. I didn't know any of this, Camilla. I didn't know you were going through all of this alone." She sighed heavily, her expression softening for a brief moment. "And who said you had the right to know, Alexander? You left me. And it wasn't for a day or even a week. It was years of choices that left me here, doing what I do to survive. It wasn't easy, but it's my reality now." Camilla stared at the wall in the background, as if trying to push away the memory of everything she had faced. The weight of her words hit Alexander hard, and he didn't know what else to say. He knew his life was far from perfect. But now, seeing her like this, he felt like an outsider. "I didn't want it to be like this," he murmured, his words barely audible. "Camilla, if you let me, I can try to help, in everything." Camilla gave a forced smile, a sad smile that seemed to reflect all the frustration of her life. "It's not about help, Alexander. I don't need you. I never needed you, not even when we were married." That last sentence fell like a weight, and Alexander felt the world collapse around him. He wanted to believe that things could be different, that there was a chance to rebuild everything they had lost, but she no longer wanted to believe that. I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. I wanted to make things right. I want to make things right now." Camilla just looked at him for a moment, as if she was evaluating him, but she didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to be said. She turned and began to walk away slowly, without looking back, as if their future had already been decided, with no room for any more regrets or empty promises. Alexander stood there, standing in the same place, feeling empty and helpless. He knew that conversation, as necessary as it was painful, had opened an even greater gap between them. But something inside him told him that perhaps this was the first of many steps he would have to go through to one day, try to correct the mistakes of the past. When Alexander returned to the table, his steps were heavier than ever. The confrontation with Camilla was still hammering at his mind, her words echoing in his head. He could barely think straight, but he tried to compose himself enough to sit with Haley, who was watching him with a curious expression, noticing his mental absence. Haley was excited, talking about the trip to Paris she planned to take, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. But Alexander could barely follow her words. He was thinking about Camilla, about the pregnancy, about how all of that seemed so distant from his life now. He saw her with a visibly growing belly, and that simple detail changed everything. The pain in Alexander's chest seemed to have no end. How had he allowed things to get to this point? "Alexander, are you listening to me?" Haley's voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked at her, trying to hide what he was feeling, but Haley was perceptive. She had the ability to read his expressions, to notice any change in his attitude. "Oh, sure. Sorry, Haley, I was just thinking about something," Alexander said, forcing a smile. He tried to focus on her words, but the image of Camilla, with her distant gaze and her belly, continued to invade his mind. Haley didn't seem entirely convinced. She frowned, watching him closely, but didn't insist any further. "What's wrong? You seemed distracted. Did something happen?" Alexander swallowed hard, looking for a way to divert the conversation without Haley noticing the turmoil going on inside him. "No, nothing. I was just thinking about some work issues. You know how it is." He tried to give a more casual tone to his voice, but he couldn't completely disguise the tension. Haley arched an eyebrow, clearly not believing him. "Oh, I see. But you seemed quite agitated, Alexander. Is that really all?" Alexander took a deep breath, feeling guilty for lying, but he knew he couldn't tell her the truth. Not like this. Not at that moment. He needed time to understand what was happening to him with the situation. Telling Haley that he had found his ex-wife pregnant after so long was a burden he wasn't ready to share yet. I was just a little surprised by something. Don't worry, it's okay. I'll calm down. Let's talk about our trip. You were saying you were going to Paris, weren't you?" Alexander tried to change the subject, trying to lighten the mood. Haley, although she seemed uncomfortable with Alexander's evasive answer, went back to talking about the trip, but the tension was still in the air. Alexander couldn't shake the image of Camilla, the weight in her eyes, the silent pain she carried. He knew things had changed forever, and he was starting to realize that maybe there would never be a way back. With his thoughts conflicting and his mind in turmoil, Alexander felt lost between the past and the present. He was with Haley, but somehow Camilla was still there, occupying a space he was desperately trying to push away. When he got home, night had already fallen, and the house was silent, except for the soft sound of Alexander's breathing. He sat on the couch, his hands resting on his knees, staring into space. His body was physically present in the room, but his mind was somewhere far away. He thought about Camilla, about the pregnancy, about the pain in her eyes and the unspoken words. The vision of her still lingered in front of him, like an echo he couldn't shake. The weight of guilt was overwhelming. He remembered how he had left Camilla behind in search of something bigger, more ambitious. He had always thought she was part of his past, a story he wanted to forget. Now, over time, the choices he had made began to turn against him. The woman he had abandoned was there, alone, pregnant, living a reality he had never imagined. He knew that, in some way, that situation was the result of his own actions. Feeling increasingly suffocated by guilt, Alexander knew he needed answers. He needed to understand what had happened to Camilla, what she had been through, and what this pregnancy meant. He couldn't just ignore it. He couldn't live with the doubt any longer. It was then that he had an idea. Liam, his lawyer and longtime friend. Although Liam's role was primarily in the legal field, he was also someone Alexander trusted deeply. He knew that if anyone could help him understand what had happened to Camilla, it was Liam. Alexander picked up his cell phone and, with shaking hands, made the call. "Liam, it's Alexander," he said, trying to hide the tension in his voice. I need your help." Liam answered quickly, his voice as calm and precise as ever. "Hi, Alexander. Sure, what happened? You seem worried." "I am," Alexander replied, running a hand over his face. I ran into Camilla today at the restaurant. She's pregnant. And I didn't know that. I need information about her. What happened? What has she been doing? I need to understand more about her situation, about what happened in her life after we broke up." Liam was silent for a moment. Alexander could hear a sigh on the other end of the line. Liam had always been one to think before speaking, and he knew that what Alexander was asking was not simple. "Alexander, you have to be careful what you ask for," Liam said, his voice firm. "Looking into someone's past, especially an ex-wife's, is not a simple decision. And the truth, well, the truth can be very painful. What do you really hope to find? What do you want to do with this information?" Alexander felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't prepared to hear Liam's words, but he knew he was right. The truth could be difficult. It could turn his life upside down. But on the other hand, he felt like he couldn't move on without knowing. "I know, Liam, but I need to know. I can't go on without understanding what happened. I need answers. And if I can help, maybe I can fix things. I need to try." Alexander's voice was thick with emotion, and he knew he wasn't just talking about Camilla. He was also talking about himself, about the flaws he recognized within himself. Liam sighed once more, and Alexander felt his friend's hesitation through the line. "Okay, Alexander, I'll do the investigation, but you need to be prepared for what comes. What you find out may not be what you expect, and if it's painful, don't forget that you're dealing with the consequences of your choices." "I understand, Liam, but I need to know. Do what you can to find out the truth." After hanging up the phone, Alexander was silent, his mind filled with questions and a sense of helplessness. What would he do with what he found out? How would he deal with the consequences of all this? He knew he couldn't change the past, but now he was determined to do whatever it took to redeem himself and, who knows, correct part of the mistake he had made by leaving Camilla behind. The night dragged on, and the guilt wouldn't leave him. But he knew that at some point, the truth would come out. and he would need to be ready to face it. The next few days were a mix of anxiety and uncertainty for Alexander. Although he knew that Liam's investigation was ongoing, he couldn't help but feel increasingly consumed by guilt. With each passing morning, the image of Camilla, pregnant and alone, seemed to become more vivid, more impossible to ignore. He could no longer look away from the pain she carried, and he knew deep down that he had been a part of it. When the report arrived, Alexander was unprepared for the harsh reality he would find in it. He was alone in his office when Liam's email finally appeared in his inbox. The words, "report on Camilla," felt heavy, loaded with something he might not be ready to face. With sweaty palms, Alexander opened the file, his eyes skimming the first few lines. The report detailed Camilla's life in the last few years after the separation. What he read was a blow to his chest. Camilla, the woman he had left behind, was facing a series of challenges. Her job as a waitress at the restaurant where she had seen him the night before was just a small part of the daily struggle she faced. She had struggled and struggled to keep her financial life stable after the separation. Without Alexander's support, she had had to learn to be strong, to make sacrifices to survive. The most painful part of the report, however, was about the pregnancy. Camilla had no one by her side. She worked long hours, often skipping meals, ignoring her own health in order to pay the bills and keep a roof over her head. Her pregnancy, which should have been a time of joy, was being marked by complications and medical challenges. The report described frequent but low-cost doctor visits and the lack of financial support. Alexander felt a wave of shame and regret. How could he have been so blind? He had followed his ambition, his quest for a life of luxury and success, while she was there, facing a lonely struggle, without even having the chance to ask for help. The weight of it all crushed him. But what surprised him most about the report was the fact that Camilla, despite all the difficulties, never turned to him. She never tried to get in touch, never asked for anything. She simply moved on, alone, without expecting anything from him anymore. It was a resistance that Alexander didn't know how to process. When he finished reading the report, Alexander felt destroyed, as if a part of his soul had been ripped out. He leaned back in his chair, his mind clouded by confusing thoughts. With each sentence, he felt more guilty. And what was worse, he didn't know how to fix everything he had done. Liam was right. The truth was painful. And now Alexander knew that the choices he had made went far beyond a relationship mistake. He had destroyed an entire world. But at the same time, something inside him also began to change. He could no longer run away from the consequences. He needed to take responsibility and try somehow to undo the pain he had caused. What shook him the most was the realization that Camilla had been incredibly brave. She had moved on, without looking back, without asking for anything from anyone. Alexander had never understood her strength, how much she was capable of facing alone. And there, in that report, he saw his ex-wife not as the vulnerable woman he had abandoned, but as an incredible woman, capable of enduring everything for herself, and now for the child she was carrying. With a heavy heart, Alexander closed the computer. He didn't know exactly what he would do with this new information, but one thing was clear. He owed Camilla a debt, and now, more than ever, he knew he had to pay it. The weight of the decision was immense. Alexander didn't think twice when he decided he needed to go back to the restaurant, where everything had begun to change. Deep down, he knew he could no longer keep running away from what was inevitable. The guilt, the regret, all of it had been eating away at him for days, and now he was about to face Camilla, the woman he had left behind. He arrived at the restaurant late in the afternoon, when the business was quieter, but the tension in his chest was unbearable. When he walked through the door, he felt his heart race. The familiar aroma of food in the air, the empty tables, the soft light of the lamps. It was all like a time capsule, taking him back to the past. Alexander saw Camilla working as a waitress again, and his eyes immediately fixed on her. She was wearing her uniform, but something was different. She looked more tired, older than he remembered, and her visible pregnancy belly made everything even more real. He took a deep breath and walked to the counter. Camilla saw him approaching, and for a moment, their expressions met. She didn't move, she didn't smile, but she didn't ignore him completely either. Her gaze was more distant than ever, as if she were trying to keep a solid wall between them. Alexander felt as if he were facing an impossible mountain to climb. She was still so scarred by the abandonment, by the contempt he had shown her. He could see it in her eyes, in the short, precise gestures as she waited on tables, keeping her distance. "I need to talk to you, Camilla," Alexander said, his voice low, almost pleading. She didn't answer right away, but her expression hardened. "What do you want, Alexander?" The question was heavy with distrust, as if she had spent so much time trying to protect herself from him that the idea of a meeting now seemed almost surreal. He felt the weight of pain in her answer and continued, "Just a conversation, please. I need to talk about what happened, about everything." Camilla sighed deeply and looked around, as if searching for a way out. But finally, something in her expression changed. Maybe it was the weight of time, the reality that, after so many years, he still showed up. Or maybe it was the need to finally understand what he had to say. She nodded, and Alexander knew this was the chance he needed. "Let's go," she said, her tone almost indifferent. "But I'm not going to stay here all day, Alexander. I'm not interested in idle chatter." They walked to the back of the restaurant, where there was a small area reserved for employees. Camilla sat in a chair, arms crossed, and watched Alexander with wary eyes. The silence between them was almost oppressive. Alexander, however, didn't know where to begin. He looked at her now growing belly, and at the eyes that had once been so familiar, but now seemed so distant. He sat down in front of her, and finally spoke with a sincerity that cost him every word. "Camilla, I was wrong. I was so wrong that I don't even know how to apologize. I left you behind, and I know that everything that happened to you was my fault. I was blind, selfish. I went after everything I thought I needed, and I forgot about you. I forgot about us." She looked at him, her expression still hard. "You went after your money, Alexander. I know. You don't need to come up with those excuses now." He didn't waver. He was determined. "I know that nothing I say will erase what happened, but I need to ask you one thing. Let me be a part of this baby's life. I can't change the past, but I can try to make the future different." Those words weighed heavily on Camilla. She watched him for a long moment, her eyes thoughtful, but still a little hard. "Do you think you can just come back and be a part of his life, as if nothing had happened? Do you think I can trust you after everything?" Alexander swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words sinking into his chest, but he wouldn't walk away now. "I know it's not easy, and I know that trust is something I could never expect you to give me right away, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I want to be here, for real, for you, for him. I don't want to be just a stranger who shows up now." Camilla was silent for a moment. Her gaze was distant, but there was something in her face that Alexander couldn't identify. She seemed to process every word, every offer he was making. Finally, she sighed and with a slight shake of her head said, "I don't know, Alexander. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can trust you again. But I'll give you a chance, just one chance to prove that you've changed." Alexander felt an enormous relief, although he knew that the road would be long and difficult. "I'll prove it, Camilla. I'll do it for you and for him. I promise." Silence fell again, but this time there was no longer that immeasurable distance between them. Something had changed, even if it was just a small step. Camilla looked at him with a softer gaze, and Alexander knew that this was his chance. The chance to rebuild what he had destroyed, to finally do the right thing. The days that followed the conversation in the restaurant were a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings for Alexander. He felt like he had taken an important step, but he still knew that the road ahead would be full of obstacles. Camilla seemed more distant, as if she were protecting herself from everything he was trying to offer, but at the same time, there was something in her posture, a sign that perhaps she was beginning to open a small crack in his heart. It was then that, to Alexander's surprise, Camilla invited him to her apartment. The message she sent was simple, without much fuss, but still full of meaning. "If you really want to understand, come. I'll show you how things are," the message said. Alexander knew that this was another important step, and without hesitation, accepted the invitation. When he arrived at the building where she lived, the environment was already very different from the luxurious apartment he knew, where he lived with Haley, full of style and comfort. The neighborhood where Camilla lived was simple and modest, with narrow streets and sidewalks with some holes. The building, although well kept, did not have the shine of an elite place. Alexander felt an instant discomfort, as if it were a completely different world from the one he was used to. She greeted him at the door, and Alexander noticed something he hadn't noticed before: the tiredness in her eyes. It wasn't just the weight of the pregnancy, but a deep exhaustion of someone who had fought alone for a long time. Camilla was more fragile than he imagined. "Come in," she said with a shy smile, as if she still didn't know what to expect from him. Alexander entered, and was immediately struck by the simplicity of the place. The apartment had no luxury whatsoever. The worn-out sofa was in the corner of the living room. The walls were marked by time, and the decor was modest, with old and simple furniture. The curtains were open, but the daylight didn't seem to be able to fully illuminate the room. Alexander observed the room carefully, beginning to realize the harsh reality she had faced while he was lost in his own interests. Camilla sat in a chair near the window, and he did the same, feeling the tension rise in the air. "I knew you would see all of this," Camilla said, breaking the silence. "It's not much, but it's what I got." Alexander swallowed hard, trying to process everything that was before him. She seemed so different from the ambitious woman he had known, the woman who lived in a world of achievement and promise. Now, here she was, in a simple apartment, struggling every day to keep her head above water. I didn't know," he said, his voice low and full of shame. "I never imagined you were going through all this." Camilla looked at him with a sad smile, almost as if she had accepted her fate without much to do. "I didn't expect you to know," she said. "But you were busy with your own world, with your career, with Haley. You never had time to know." Alexander felt the weight of those words like a sharp blade. He looked around, trying to understand the true struggle she had faced. There were bags of groceries in the corner, clothes hastily folded on a table, and a pile of bills and documents on top of a simple piece of furniture. Camilla was clearly trying to deal with the difficulties alone, with very little support. "I can't go back in time," he said, his voice full of regret. "But if you give me a chance, I'll do my best to help you. I want to be here now." She looked at him, and for the first time, Alexander saw something softer in her gaze. "You say that now, but do you really understand what you're saying, Alexander? Do you really know what it means to be here, for real, not just to show up to feel like you've done the bare minimum?" He didn't answer right away because he knew his words were still fragile, like unfulfilled promises. What he said now needed to be more than a simple wish for redemption. He needed to show her, not with words but with actions, that he was willing to be by her side. Camilla, I don't know if I can fix everything I've done, he said finally, but I'll try. I'll try in every way I can. She watched him silently, and for a moment, the tension between them eased. Maybe it was the shared pain, maybe the mutual understanding that they had both made mistakes, but in that moment, there was a silent connection between them. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but heavy in a way that they both needed. Alexander knew that the journey he was beginning at that moment would not be easy. There were many hurts, many wounds to heal. But at least now he knew he had the chance to show Camilla that he was committed to being more than a spectator in her life. He wanted to be part of the solution, not the problem. Camilla stood up slowly and with a discreet gesture indicated a chair next to a small dining table. "Do you want something to drink?" she asked, trying to give a sense of normalcy to the encounter. Alexander nodded, knowing that words might be easy, but that the most important thing now was time and actions. He sat, waiting for the next step, aware that from now on he needed to earn every bit of Camilla's trust, one day at a time. The atmosphere inside the apartment was charged with silent tension. Alexander felt as if he were in a minefield of unspoken words, of old regrets, waiting for the next step to be crucial. Camilla, with the calmness that seemed to hide all the pain she had carried alone, finally broke the silence that weighed between them. "Do you really want to know why I never looked for you during the pregnancy?" she asked, her voice calm, but her eyes filled with a deep pain that she no longer tried to hide. Alexander remained silent, feeling that the answer she would give would be the turning point. His question was about to be answered, but not in a simple or easy way. "I knew you were busy with Haley, with your career, with your own world," she said, staring at him. "When I found out I was pregnant, you were the last person I thought about. You were so wrapped up in your own interests that you didn't even think about me, about us." Alexander felt a pang in his chest. Camilla's words were like knives, each one reawakening an old regret. She was right. In all the time he had been away, absorbed in his work and the glow of a carefree life, he had forgotten about the woman who stood beside him. She was a real person with real feelings, and he had cruelly ignored her in the name of an ambition that now seemed empty and meaningless. "I didn't know how much you were suffering," he said, his voice hoarse, filled with guilt. "I lost myself. I lost myself in things that now mean nothing." Camilla watched him for a long time, as if trying to gauge the sincerity in his eyes. She no longer believed in empty words, in promises he had not kept before. The trust she had once shared with him now seemed like something broken, distant, and almost irreparable. "I couldn't trust you," she replied, and her words sounded like a sentence. "You left me alone, Alexander. When I needed you the most, you walked away. And with each passing day, the pain only grew worse. I couldn't expect you to change, because you never did anything to show that you would." Alexander felt a lump in his throat, the weight of her words crushing his defenses. He knew she was right, but hearing it from her mouth made it all the more real. He had failed her in a way that couldn't be easily erased. But at the same time, he felt a genuine desire to prove that he had changed, that if she would let him, he could be someone different, someone she could trust again. "Camilla, I know I believed that I could do it all on my own, that I could be the great businessman and still be a good man," he said, each word sounding more sincere than the last. "But I was wrong. I wasn't good to you or to us. And I can't change the past. But I want to show you that from now on, I'll be the person you always deserved. I promise I'll change. I'll be here for you, for our son. I'll do everything I can to earn your trust back." She looked at him, and for the first time, Alexander saw a small change in her gaze. It wasn't an instant forgiveness, but something more subtle, an opening, a small crack in the wall she'd built over the months and years. Camilla knew he was trying, but she also knew that empty words weren't enough. Only time and actions could prove if he was truly committed to changing, or if this was just another broken promise. "I can't promise you that I'll forgive you right away, Alexander," she said, but her voice was no longer so rigid. "But if you really want to change, show me with your actions. Show me that you're here to stay, that you're not here just because you regret it now. And show me that you can be the man that I and our son need." Alexander nodded, a sense of relief mixed with responsibility filling his heart. He knew the road would be long, and he would need to earn every bit of Camilla's trust. But at least now, he had the chance. He had the chance to be the man she deserved, to be the father his son deserved. He was no longer willing to let fear or arrogance keep him from true happiness. "I will show you, Camilla," he said firmly. "I will show you every day that I can be the man you need. From now on, my words will be accompanied by actions, and I hope that, in time, you will be able to believe in me again." Camilla took a deep breath, and with a small smile replied, "We will see, Alexander. We will see." In the following days, Alexander committed to being more present in Camilla's life, not with empty promises, but with concrete actions that demonstrated his commitment to repairing what had broken between them. He knew the road to regaining her trust would be long and arduous, but he was determined to take each step, even if it was one small change at a time. Alexander began to discreetly attend Camilla's doctor's appointments, always making sure not to be intrusive, but making it clear that he was there to support her. He would wait in the corner of the waiting room, away from prying eyes, while she underwent her routine checkups. Each visit to the office, each follow-up he did, was an opportunity for him to show that he truly cared about her and the baby's health. At the first appointment he attended, when Camilla was about to have an ultrasound, she looked at him suspiciously, as if she was still evaluating his intentions. But when she saw Alexander's anxious look as the doctor positioned the device on her belly, something changed. He didn't say a word, but his gaze was filled with emotion, with a kind of vulnerability she had never seen in him before. "It's okay, Alexander. There's no need to be nervous," Camilla said with a shy smile, as if she was trying to ease the weight of the moment for him. He smiled back, but his smile was barely noticeable, as if he was absorbing the reality that for the first time in a long time, he was actually actively participating in her life. After the appointment, as they were leaving the office, he picked up Camilla's bag, a simple gesture, but one she had never seen him do before. She hesitated for a moment, but then let him help her. And that simple act of care spoke louder than any words he could have said. Alexander was there, not just to fulfill an obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to be there for her. Over the next few weeks, he became more discreet in his actions. He didn't want Camilla to feel like he was invading her space or trying to force a reconciliation she wasn't ready to accept. He would start helping with the little things, paying her medical bills, providing food, and making sure she had everything she needed without pressuring her to accept his help directly. On a cold autumn afternoon, while Alexander was at home, he received a message from Camilla. "Can you come here, please? I have something to show you." Without hesitation, Alexander grabbed his coat and went straight to her apartment. When he arrived, she led him to the bedroom, where he saw a carefully organized set of baby clothes. It wasn't much, but it was the embodiment of all the care she had put into preparing the best possible for the baby. "I don't have much," she said, looking at the items with a shy smile, "but it's enough to start." Alexander felt a pang in his heart. She had done everything by herself up until this point, and now he had the chance to be a part of it, to be a part of her life and the baby's. He approached, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gentle gesture, without words. There was no need for more than that. He knew what she was feeling, a mixture of gratitude, but also doubt. She was starting to accept his help, but there was still hesitation, an invisible wall that he needed to keep breaking down. "You're not alone in this anymore, Camilla," he said softly. "I promised I would change, and I'm here to prove that I will." She glanced at him sideways, her expression softer now. "I know, and I see that. But you still have a long way to go, Alexander." "I'm willing to walk that path," he replied with determination. "If you let me, I'll show you that I can be the man you need." The tension in the room eased a little, and for a moment, Camilla seemed to relax, as if she could finally believe, even a little, that he was there for her without ulterior motives. That, in itself, was a big step. In the days that followed, Alexander continued to support Camilla in the same discreet way. He accompanied her whenever he could, without pressuring her, without demanding anything in return. He knew that rebuilding trust wouldn't be something that would happen overnight, but he was willing to fight for it. Every doctor's appointment, every gesture of affection, and every small financial help was a way of showing that he was committed, not only to the baby, but also to her. Camilla, in turn, was beginning to notice that he was different, that there was something genuine in his actions. She still felt vulnerable and insecure, but little by little, the confidence she thought she had lost began to return, albeit cautiously. "You're doing well, Alexander," she told him one night as he helped her prepare dinner. "But it's important for you to know that we're just getting started. I'm not going to hand you my forgiveness on a silver platter, and I don't expect you to fix everything quickly." He smiled once again with sincerity on his face. "I don't expect you to forgive me now, Camilla. But I'm willing to wait, to do whatever it takes, until you see that I'm someone you can trust." And so, step by step, they continued to rebuild the bridge that had been broken, each gesture of care being one more brick in the foundation of a new beginning. The birth of the baby was a moment that Alexander never imagined he would experience. When he received the call from Camilla, his heart raced. She was in labor, and he knew that his place was by her side, even if he didn't know if she wanted him there. But he couldn't let the opportunity to be with her pass by, to show her that he was truly committed. Alexander arrived at the hospital in a whirlwind of emotions. As he walked quickly through the corridors, his mind alternated between the fear that everything would go wrong and the hope that this would be the first big step towards a new life for the three of them. He entered the delivery room where Camilla was lying, breathing heavily. Her face was pale, but she smiled tiredly when she saw him. You're here." She spoke with difficulty, but her voice had something of reconciliation. Alexander took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I said I would be, Camilla. I won't abandon you this time." The next few hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Alexander stood by Camilla's side, holding her hand, offering words of support. He was there, unhurried, not wanting to be the hero, but simply being someone who was willing to be there for her, truly, without demands, without expectations. He knew that, for her, every moment of support was a victory, something he had never given before. Finally, the baby was born, with a loud and full cry of life. The sound of the crying was like music to Alexander's ears. He couldn't believe that this small being, so fragile and dependent, was his son. The nurses cleaned the baby quickly before placing him in Camilla's arms, who was exhausted but lit up with a smile of happiness. Alexander approached, his eyes brimming with tears. "Camilla, he's perfect," he said, his voice breaking. She nodded, her eyes shining with pure emotion. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked, her voice soft. She knew that moment meant more to Alexander than anything else. He hesitated, looking at the tiny being in her arms, and then, with a trembling hand, he accepted the baby. Alexander's tears began to fall as he held his son for the first time. The little creature, still with his eyes closed and his arms tucked in, looked so vulnerable. But he felt an instant connection. Something deep and irrevocable took over him completely. He felt unconditional love, and at the same time, an enormous responsibility. "I promise I will be a good father to you," he murmured, looking at the baby with eyes full of emotion. "I will give you the best of me every day. I will not make mistakes anymore. I will not leave you or your mother alone anymore." Camilla looked at him, surprised and touched by the sincerity in Alexander's words. She knew there was still a lot to be rebuilt between them, but seeing Alexander there, with the baby in his arms, made her believe that perhaps the promises could be kept. Maybe, just maybe, he would be able to be the man she always needed. Alexander continued to hold the baby, his eyes fixed on it, as if he were absorbing every detail. He felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of happiness and regret, for everything that had happened before, for everything he could have done differently. But there, in that moment, he knew he could not change the past. What he could do was move forward, with his son in his arms, ready to build a future that, until then, seemed impossible. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of the baby, who was beginning to calm down in Alexander's arms. He looked at Camilla and, with a shy smile, said, "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I have a lot to prove, but I will do everything I can to be the man you and our son deserve." Camilla just nodded, a tear running down her face. She knew that the road ahead would still be long, but perhaps with time and effort, they could begin to rebuild everything they had lost. And in the midst of all the difficulties, there was a small flame of hope burning in her heart. Maybe love was still possible, even after so much pain and disappointment. Maybe redemption was something the three of them could achieve together. Months had passed since the baby was born, and Alexander and Camilla were beginning to see the fruits of the change he had promised. The road had not been easy. There were days when distrust still hung in the air, especially on Camilla's part, who still carried the scars of past pain. But little by little, she began to realize that Alexander was committed to being a good father, and more than that, he was becoming the man she had always wanted him to be, someone present, responsible, and willing to fight for a better future for the three of them. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Camilla, while tidying the apartment, looked at Alexander, who was sitting on the couch with the baby in his arms, singing softly to calm him down. The smile on Alexander's face was genuine and full of love. He had cut himself off from anything that could possibly distract him. His ex-girlfriend Haley was no longer a part of his life. Alexander had devoted himself completely to Camilla and their son, trying to somehow repair the damage done by his past ambition. Camilla approached him and with a sigh said, I really didn't believe you were capable of doing all this. I thought it would be another broken promise, another lie that I would have to swallow." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "But you have fulfilled everything you said. You have become the father our son needs, and the man I have always wanted by my side." Alexander looked at her, his eyes full of emotion. "I know that time cannot erase everything that has happened. I know that I cannot change the past, but I am doing everything I can to be the person you and our son deserve. I want to build something of real value, something that will last." Camilla smiled softly, feeling the weight of her words. The baby, now a few months old, was sleeping peacefully in her arms, a small image of peace and innocence. She knew that despite the hardships and pain they had experienced, the love between them was turning into something solid. They were starting to trust each other again, one step at a time. "I know, Alexander. I see it in everything you do. and it gives me hope. I finally see a future for the three of us. It's not about what we were anymore, but about what we can be together. The two of them were silent for a moment, savoring the calm that had settled into their lives. The baby, in his peaceful sleep, seemed to be the perfect symbol of the new life they were building. A future in which they could look back and realize that, despite everything, they had found a way back to each other. Alexander kissed Camilla on the forehead and, looking down at the baby in his arms, said, "We're going to give him the best. We're going to be a family for real. And this time, no matter what happens, I'll be here, always. There's nothing more I want than to build our life together." Camilla looked at him with a look of gratitude and renewed love. "I believe in you now, Alexander. I believe in us." And there, in that moment, between silent glances and renewed promises, Camilla and Alexander found what had been lost in the past. Together with their son, they rebuilt their family, certain that, despite the mistakes and errors made, the future still had much to offer. Hope was back, and this time they were ready to live the new beginning they so deserved. I'm sure this story touched you. If you really liked it, then leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. By doing so, you will always receive the latest news from the channel.